on this episode of the WildFed podcast.
The Hawaiian Islands were just these super fertile pieces of land that were waiting for people to come and plant stuff there.
Many of the plants that we consider native plants are not native plants here. They are brought here 800 years ago.
I always try to get people to experience the plants with all their senses. The more senses that you absorb it with, the more you're going to remember it.
The mame sapote that you shared with us today was the best one I'd ever had, like the filling to a pumpkin pie.
Chocolate is responsible for deciphering the Mayan language.
I know at least 20 people who think they are Willy Wonka. So how are you getting such a unique flavor profile?
You have 65 fruit trees on a 16th of an acre.
It's this double-edged sword because it's so delicious, but it's also pretty toxic.
Virtual reality, ethnobotany, chocolate making, and now edible landscaping and grafting.
Episode 144 of the WildFed podcast, the KavaCast, Foraging Honolulu with Nat Bletter, PhD, is brought to you by Surthrival. If you're looking to increase testosterone levels without turning to pharmaceutical testosterone replacement therapy, take a look at Surthrival's pine pollen. Pine pollen is a rich source of naturally occurring testosterone and a suite of other androgenic hormones that can be used to gently boost your T levels. Right now until the end of August, the coupon code RESTORE20 gets you 20% off all pine pollen products at surthrival.com. My favorite is Surthrival's Pine Pollen Pure Potency. It's an herbal elixir I formulated with stinging nettle root to keep your body's free testosterone levels up while the pine pollen gently boosts them. It's got Siberian ginseng for hormone upregulation and maple syrup, vanilla bean, and orange peel to give it an incredible orange creamsicle flavor. Stop by surthrival.com to check out the entire pine pollen lineup, including pine pollen powder, pine pollen tincture, and of course, pine pollen pure potency, Surthrival's flagship pine pollen product. These are formulas I use and stand by, and so do thousands of other men who've used them too. For the rest of August, use the coupon code RESTORE20 for 20% off all pine pollen products at surthrival.com. These days, it's smart to have a side hustle, and as a wild food enthusiast in a rapidly expanding food-centric space, you're well positioned to start your own small business. You've been hearing me talk about Forage.market for some time now, and for good reason. It's like Etsy for wild and specialty foods. Whether you're buying or selling, Foraged.market is the place that foragers like you are linking up with chefs, restaurants, and other foodies who are looking for your raw ingredients or value-added products. Join for free, list your products for free, and be seen by millions of potential customers. Let's face it, getting noticed is hard, but Forage.market makes it easy since it's the place your potential buyers are already shopping. With powerful shipping options, including local pickup and delivery, secure payment processing, and the ability to take pre-orders, Forage.market makes selling and getting paid a breeze. Go over to Forage.market/wildfed to get started. There you'll find a coupon for $10 off your first order of any of the incredible products you find there from other sellers. Learn more about their incredible vision and conservation ethic by listening to episode 122 of the WildFed podcast. Foraged.market, the global marketplace for wild and specialty foods. I'm Daniel Vitalis, and you're listening to the WildFed podcast, a show about reconnecting with nature through hunting, fishing, foraging, and food. WildFed. Food is all around you. Welcome to today's episode with Nat Bletter, PhD, which we're jokingly calling episode 1 of the KavaCast, since Nat, an ethnobotanist, prepared kava, or what the Hawaiians call ava, for Grant and I just prior to recording. Since it's often used to facilitate conversations, meetings, and negotiations, as well as to celebrate gatherings, we decided it would be a great beverage to consume while we discuss the plants of Hawaii. Kava is the root of Piper methysticum, a member of the black pepper family with mildly intoxicating properties that have been used deep into antiquity by Polynesian people throughout the South Pacific. It's a wonderful milky white beverage that cools and numbs the mouth and seems to have a similar effect on the rest of your central nervous system too, gently relaxing and sedating you in a way that doesn't impair your judgment like ethanol or dramatically alter your mental state like cannabis. One way to think about it is to compare it to coffee. Like coffee, it's definitely a drug, but one that can be safely used while still operating heavy machinery. But its effect is almost the exact opposite. While coffee is energizing and makes you feel more alert and stimulated, kava in similar strength, makes you feel chilled out and relaxed. In fact, it's so nice one wonders why it's not a more common daily driver for more people. Maybe it's just antithetical to the pace of our Western world, but it seems to me just the kind of drug we need these days. The last time I was in New York City, I noticed several kava bars had popped up there, each serving a menu of varieties. So perhaps we'll be seeing more of this wonderful plant in the years to come as more and more businesses with this kava bar model start opening up in cities around the country. Well, Grant and I are now back in Maine after 2 weeks of filming on the Hawaiian Islands. We were there making 2 episodes for our upcoming Season 3 of the WildFed TV show. Our first few days were spent on Oahu, and our remaining time was spent on Molokai. You'll hear about our 10 days on Molokai in next week's show, but today's episode was recorded after a day of foraging with our guest Nat, both in his food forest garden and out in a valley on the edges of Honolulu. The Hawaiian Islands are, of course, incredible to visit, and as a wild food enthusiast, they provide a very unique perspective given that most of the edible species there are not truly native to the islands, but rather were brought by the Polynesian Voyagers who first settled the archipelago. They came on double-hulled canoes and brought with them a suite of domesticated and semi-domesticated animals and plants, including pigs, dogs, and chickens, as well as plants like breadfruit, taro, kava, kukui nut, banana, coconut, mountain apple, turmeric, and sweet potato, just to name a few. Being so isolated and having no native mammal save a single bat species and a native seal, it's questionable whether it would have even been possible for native Hawaiians to have thrived on these islands without these species they were traveling with. In addition to the original plants and animals that came with those Polynesian voyagers, today there are many more animals and plants that have been brought from outside and are now essentially naturalized to the island chain. This makes it easy for foragers to focus on non-natives since they're abundant and since harvesting them takes pressure off the native species who are often threatened by the new introductions. Of course, the climate of the Hawaiian Islands is also ideal for tropical fruit horticulture, so many species of exotic fruits are grown there today, such as cacao, which Nat grows and uses to produce award-winning chocolate bars, including some made exclusively with Hawaiian-grown cacao beans, or mamey sapote, which I describe as tasting like the filling of a pumpkin pie, just better, or jackfruit, which tastes like juicy fruit gum, or macadamia nut, or pineapple, or mango. I could go on. Our time in Hawaii had a big impact on us, and true to WildFed form, we didn't just get to see these beautiful islands, or hear the sounds of the birds and the waves, or smell the tropical breeze, or feel the sand between our toes. We got to taste these islands too. That's a big part of what we do with this project, bringing our fifth sense into the experience of a place. From the fruits and vegetables to the animals, algae, and even sea salts, we imbibed these islands, making a little bit of ourselves out of one of the planet's most special and unique locations. There's so much more I want to say about Hawaii, but I'll save some of that for next week when we'll go a layer deeper. For now, let's enjoy a coconut shell of kava with Nat Bletter and learn a bit about the botany and ethnobotany of the Hawaiian Islands.
Welcome to the KavaCast. I'm your host, Daniel Vitalis.
Episode number 1.
Episode number 1. I'm here with Grant Giuliano, our producer, and Nat Bletter, PhD. Did I say your last name right?
You did.
Welcome to the show, man.
Do you know what it means, though?
I don't.
It means leaves in Yiddish and German.
How does this happen?
I thought you said it meant mother.
My first name means mother in Maya.
Mother of Leaves.
Yes, exactly.
Wow, that's cool.
That's a great name
That's
for...
what my tattoo says.
Does it say that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering earlier. I don't ever ask people about tattoos because I don't like getting
hear you.
asked about tattoos. I find it annoying because it's like about 6 times a day.
Right.
Grant sees it all the time. What are the 2 questions I get, G?
How long did that take, and did it hurt?
Every day, all day.
I was originally going to say snuffleupagus, but they didn't have an S sound in
They didn't know
Tibetan.
how to get that. Yeah. So Mother of Leaves, a really good name for an ethnobotanist.
Exactly. I was destined to be a botanist.
I think so. Man, I have noticed over the years podcasting, I've probably done about 350 podcasts now.
Mm-hmm.
The number of people who have names that in some way fit very well with their career path. I mean, not enough to be a rule, but...
When we were talking on the phone about this trip the other day, and the guy's name who was going to be checking our bags for us was named Porter.
I couldn't even believe it. Jesse says the guy who's going to meet you at the airport to check your luggage is named Porter, and I was like, come on. And neither of you guys weren't sure what the word was, right? So I looked it up, and it was like, yeah, somebody who deals with luggage. I thought that was very ironic. So we are on Oahu, in Honolulu, and this is an amazing place. But we are finally out of the city. So Grant and I spent a couple days down at Waikiki, which is,
My apologies.
well, it's beautiful and fun for like a minute and a half, and then today has been so refreshing for us. Tell us a little bit about this valley we're in and about this place.
So we're in the Pololo Valley, which is only about 10-15 minutes uphill from Waikiki, and the name means in Hawaiian clay, so the soils here are super clayey, and we're pretty far back in the valley. It should almost be called Temple Road because there's a Baha'i temple below us, Korean temple just above us, and then even further up the road there's a Zen center.
Oh, wow.
So it feels very peaceful up here, aside from when the dogs all go off around the neighborhood. And we're just on this like perfect border of rain and dry, so we can grow both wet-loving crops like cacao, and some of the drier loving crops like mango, which wouldn't do better if you were even like, a couple 100 feet up or down the valley.
Yeah. It's been amazing to, well, actually, before we start all this, I want to serve this kava because that looks great. And people are probably wondering why I said it was called the KavaCast today. We have been lucky enough to eat some incredible plants with you today. Not the least of which is all of this cacao that you are working with. And when we first rolled up, you have this molecule necklace on, and it was like, my first question is like, which molecule? Because I could have gone many directions, but it's theobroma, right?
Yeah, exactly. Theobromine, yeah.
So from right away, I was like, okay, this is a brother because I've got a huge love of cacao. But then kava came up. And it was like, oh, he likes kava too. And so hence, for folks listening, the KavaCast, we are about to imbibe.
And I love both plants very much, but never the twain shall meet. Because I used to make my kava with some cocoa powder in there, but I felt like it was tearing my body in two different directions.
Up and down at the same time.
Yeah, like a stimulant and a relaxant at the same time.
Oh, thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Although we are serving these in cacao pod molded mugs, so
the two have met.
Yeah, exactly.
Grant, have you drank kava before?
No, I've never drank kava. Yeah.
You know what I always find odd is you'll see like companies like, I don't know if
Thank you so much.
I don't know if Celestial Seasoning is who does it, but I'll see these like
As a
kava
tea.
tea where you're like,
Makes
dude,
no sense.
It's not water soluble.
No,
it doesn't
exactly.
work.
Yeah, that's why I put coconut milk in here and a little bit of ginger powder.
Oh, nice.
To help calm your stomach in case there's sometimes people get some stomach
nausea.
upset.
Yeah.
And here we say aloha. Clap our hands before we drink the kava.
Aloha.
Aloha.
And okole hao is another way to say toast in Hawaii.
Say it again?
Okole hao. So okole is your butt.
Kole hao.
So it kind of means bottoms up. And just a warning to you, Grant, it will numb your tongue a little bit.
Okay.
If
Good
it's made
recipe,
well.
Nat.
But
Wow.
no one really drinks it for the taste. It's more for the effect.
There's that flavor, that lilikoi in there.
Yeah, a little bit of that because
man.
that will accentuate the relaxing effect of the kava.
For folks who don't know what kava is or kawa, tell us a little bit about it from the
Whoa,
ethnobotanical
Daniel,
perspective.
chill out, dude.
I'm about to.
Sorry, go ahead.
That was really good.
It is a root native to Vanuatu. It is in the black pepper family, except most of the rest of that family we use the leaves or the seed pods. So this is the only one I know of where you actually use the root. And it has what are called kava lactones in it, which are kind of their own class. I haven't heard about them in any other plant. And they're these fat-soluble, relaxing compounds. And so you have to, as you were saying, it doesn't work as a hot water infusion or even a cold water infusion. You have to, traditionally, it's massaged in a fabric or sometimes made from old but clean socks. They have a special sock set aside for brewing the kava, or even more traditionally in like the coconut leaf fibers that looks kind of like a hand-woven mesh, but naturally grows on the base of coconut and other palm trees. And so it's kind of massaged in cold water. In that, in some places they put in other additions like coconut milk or coconut water or extract of a hibiscus plant in Ponape. That makes it much more bitter and very mucilaginous like okra, but a lot more potent in that case. And it's kind of used as a social lubricant all throughout the Pacific. So it replaces alcohol there, that whenever you meet a new group of people or go to a new town or have a meeting, especially if you're discussing something sensitive, everyone drinks from a community bowl of kava or ava as it's called here first.
Here in Hawaii they call it that?
Ava, yeah. Ava. So they drop the initial K.
This is an island, this is a place where Ks are very heavy phonetically.
Yeah, strange, right?
So yeah, it's interesting to drop it.
Yeah, I don't know why that happened. There's a lot of weird linguistic transitions that happened as things moved across the Pacific. So.
Oh, I'm feeling that already.
What would this taste like if you didn't have anything else in it?
Pretty dirty dishwater.
Really?
More or less.
It tastes amazing. I could drink this all day, all night.
It's a lot better with coconut and ginger. So yeah, I used to serve this. Even when I was living in New York, I'd order kava from either Vanuatu or Kauai in 5 kilo bags, and some of my fellow grad students called me the kava pusher, and I would dole it out in aliquots to all my classmates, and we'd have it journal club meetings when we were reading some really dry journal paper. But it would get everyone talking. It was very noticeable how much more talkative even the shyest nerdy ethnobotanist became after a few cups of kava.
The kava lactones, kind of like with cannabis now, it's all broken down into all of these different phenols and stuff, right? And so people are starting to understand what the different ratios of different phytochemistry in cannabis does, what kind of psychoactive effect it has, and drawing out all that subtlety. And kava's like that, right? I
think there's about 6 kava lactones,
but many varieties that are sort of known for people. People have preferences for which.
Kava of the plant. Yes, there's I have a friend who's a kava collector over on Big Island, and he has at least 20, 25 varieties, and I'm sure in Vanuatu where I've worked, and
that's where it's endemic.
They're really into their kava there. They have about probably 50 varieties at least that they mention just on some of the single islands, but they're really into this one called Boroho, which is what we're drinking right now is Vanuatu. I don't know if they mention the variety because they like the Boroho so much that they probably keep it on island and they don't ship it out. And that is super potent. One shell of that, which is equivalent to about a cup or a cup and a half, will make you feel pretty relaxed instantly. You also have it before dinner, and then you go and get especially a really fatty dinner, and it will instantly flood you with all that feeling after you eat the food. It's kind of a delayed effect. Wow. Somehow the fat in the food helps with the absorption or uptake of it.
Interesting. So we were filming an episode of WildFed the TV show with you today, and foraging through some of these valleys, which was awesome. And we'll get to that in a bit, but we were having this conversation about ethnobotany versus botany. And what I love about the ethnobotanists I know is that they're immersive with the plants.
Absolutely.
So as opposed to a kind of, and I know there's lots of botanists who would disagree with this sort of summation, but a lot of times botanists are a little bit removed from the plant. It's like the study of the plants, but not necessarily the intimate relationship with the plants. And a lot of times it seems to me that ethnobotanists are cool to sit down and drink kava or, or whatever it is. And so I really appreciate that. You've got this deep relationship with cacao, get this relationship with kava, and just today with the plants you've introduced us to, whether they're here in your food forest on your property or out where we went in the forest, it's they're all friends of yours. And I just really appreciate that kind of a relationship versus a more clinical approach to just being able to name the parts and stuff, which you also can do, and the genera and the species and all of that. But it seems like sometimes something's lost for folks who, and I just feel sad, like, to know all about it, but to not know the magic, intimately like that.
Yeah, when I'm teaching foraging classes, I always try to get people to experience the plants with all their senses. I'm like, don't stand 5 feet away from them. Like, come up to them, smell them, shake a seed pod. The more senses that you absorb it with, the more you're going to remember it. And especially like tasting it and seeing the effects of it. If it's a psychoactive plant like Kava, you're just going to remember it so much more. And on that tip you're saying about regular botanists versus ethnobotanists, when I was postdocing here at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, my boss had a cider tasting. He was working on cider apples. And so every afternoon at like 4 p.m., after coming from the 3 p.m. Kava circle, I didn't get a whole lot of work done when I was working there. We had a 4 p.m. cider tasting. We had to take like very exact notes on like the bubbliness of it and like the foretaste and aftertaste and any astringency and sweetness. I had this very complicated data logging sheet, and I'd see all the other botanists walking by and sort of being jealous that we were having so much fun with the plants. And they had to go look at another genetic sequence.
I'm going to go report on these ethnobotanists. They're having too much fun.
So there has ethnobotany is very popular with students in current day universities, but a lot of the botany departments seem a little bit resistant to including it in their curriculum, I think, because they don't see it as like a real or hard science. So I came from a very tech past. I used to do virtual reality research in Silicon Valley. Really? So I had this whole like math and computer background. So I tried to bring that to ethnobotany to try to make it a little more quantitative and slightly more respected by the other scientists.
No kidding. Earlier, you said something to me today I'd never heard anyone say, because walking around on your property here, it's clear you're grafting constantly, right? Your mangoes are all grafted. Just everything that had that apple out there, it's all grafted. The citruses are all grafted. And you referred to it as copy and pasting. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting way to talk about it, You said this is another way to copy paste a plant. And I was like, cool. I was like, oh, that's an interesting analogy, but now it makes sense to me. You come from tech,
Yes, exactly. I let that slip through.
You have 65 fruit trees on a 16th of an acre?
Yep, exactly.
It's amazing.
And there are only 4 trees here when we moved in 6 years ago.
Really?
I killed one of them, so let me do the math quick if I can still remember with my Kava brain. So what does that mean? I planted 62 of the trees here. I probably killed a few in over the years, but I always try to replant them.
I was very excited by the cacao. I'd never gotten a chance. Somehow, in all the years I've been messing around with plants, I never got to eat the fresh cacao fruit.
Oh, I never tried that. I'd love to try that before we go.
You still don't have the fruit?
No.
Oh, yeah, we got to get you some. It's quite a flavor explosion. And we, my chocolate company, Madre Chocolate, we make a dried fruit leather out of the fruit.
Whoa,
so that
cool.
people, even if you're in temperate areas like back in Maine, you can still have that nice taste.
Oh, nice.
And one of our most famous bars, the Triple Cacao, is the only bar in the world with that fruit in there and the nib. So you kind of get 3 flavors and 3 textures all from the cacao itself.
I gotta say, man, I have my attitude about podcasting. I'm very rarely confrontational with people, even if they're saying something I think is stupid. I think it doesn't facilitate good conversation, so I'm careful about that. I tend to be really I like to say good things about the people that I work with. So I say that to set up the next thing, which is I am not blowing smoke up your ass. I am impressed with your cacao.
Thank you.
I am impressed. Because you kept saying this thing to me, I'm averse to bitter flavors, and I thought, man, I don't get it. You're working with some notoriously bitter plants. And then being in ethnobotany, it's like, when I hear ethnobotany, it's almost like if you're like pick 5, adjectives like to go with that, it's like bitter is, so when you're talking about powerful plant species, especially ones that fit into ceremonial spaces for folks, typically they're alkaloid rich.
True.
And they're going to be bitter.
Very
right?
true.
So I was like, how can he be averse to bitter flavors? And then we started to eat your cacao, and it was like, wow, even at 70%, they just so mild. And I was really impressed with that because typically, and one of our camera guys today was saying the same thing. Phil, he was like, man, this, I would expect, he's like, I often eat milk chocolate, he said, because I don't like the bitterness. And he's like, but, I'm really enjoying this. And each bar that we tried had a surprisingly mild flavor. Flavors in there were really excellent, but like the cacao
bitterness
itself, the bitterness is low.
Yeah.
How are you doing that?
Don't give me any credit for that. I try to push off all the credit onto the farmers because they are the ones doing the fermentation, which removes a lot of that bitterness from the...
But everybody's fermenting. And I've known, like I was telling you a little of my background, I've been around the cacao scene, like a lot of it, for a lot of years. I know at least 20 people who think they are Willy Wonka. And everybody's gone to Peru or Ecuador or somewhere to develop their sources, and they all think they have the very best cacao, and so everybody's fermenting. So how are you getting such a unique flavor profile?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, Hawaii is probably a really special place for cacao and chocolate because it's the first time in history that we've had cacao farmers like all the ones we work with. I am not actually a full-on cacao farmer. I just have 14 trees around my tiny little 16th of an acre. So that's only enough to make like 500 bars a year. So that's my personal supply, right?
I was going to say, you don't let those go very easily, I bet.
I try to keep up to like a half pound of chocolate a day as my quota minimum. So I'm easily consuming those 500 bars myself. So we work with farms all around the islands, and it is one of the the first times that we've had these farms next to chocolate makers like us, also next to research universities like the University of Hawaii, who has this amazing lab. This is where I got turned on even more to Kava. It's a Kava, coffee, and cacao lab, so all the tropical beverages. Yeah, you can imagine it was the most popular lab for all the students to hang out in during the day. So in the morning, they have amazing espresso, 3 p.m. and mid-afternoon, they're grinding some chocolate and serving that up, and then around 3 o'clock, they roll out the Kava, and the professor there, Skip Bittenbender, who should absolutely have a chocolate company with that last name, Bittenbender Chocolate. That sounds so good. He would brew up a bunch of different varieties of Kava. So he was all about like, oh, here's the Boroho, here's the Popolo, all these different Hawaiian and other Polynesian varieties. So it was definitely the lab to be in. And so he was doing a lot of work on the fermentation because it's hard to do in Hawaii since we're one of the coldest places on the planet where cacao is grown. And you can see it doesn't really have trouble growing here, but that fermentation can be really difficult when we have these freezing cold winters. Freezing to a tree that's native to the Amazon. For you guys from Maine, it's probably hard
pretty warm here.
Right. It's hard to imagine Hawaii is cold for anything. But, we also have paper thin single frame walls, so we have no insulation. So it's the same temperature inside as outside. So in the winter when it's goes down to 56 outside, it's that same temperature in here.
Hard to ferment at 56.
Yeah, like if you fermented anything like yogurt or kimchi or sauerkraut, you know that the microbes are only happy in this very narrow band.
They go on pause at a certain temperature.
Yeah, and they'll kind of just shut off, go on strike. So we have to do a lot of tricks in Hawaii to get it to ferment well. But to borrow another expression from Silicon Valley, try to turn this bug into a feature, and that if you do it right, you can get all these crazy, unique flavors that you don't really get in other parts of the world. So that really fruity taste that you tasted in the North Shore Oahu, the 9 Fine Minus chocolate, that is kind of like the Hawaii terroir for cacao and chocolate, that fruitiness. Or we have this Criollo bar, which is the one I call the gateway chocolate. That's partly the variety. The Criollo is a Mayan heirloom type of cacao where they bred a lot of the bitterness out of it. So it tastes almost like a milk chocolate, even when it's a 70% dark. And that we use to convert the milk chocolate lovers to the dark side.
From Hershey's to the dark side.
Yes, exactly.
You were telling me that the antiquity of cacao usage keeps getting pushed back further and further.
Oh, yeah, totally.
And that was really interesting to me, too, because I associate it with the Yucatan and the Maya. But you were saying, actually, that pre-Inca, it was being used, and maybe even further back, huh?
Yeah, at first we thought it was the Aztec and Maya, then they pushed it back to the Olmec in the Yucatan we were talking about, and then their predecessors, the Bara. And then up until a few years ago, the furthest south was in Nicaragua, I believe, like 3,000 years ago.
Wow.
And then just in like 2019, I think they found some remains in northern Ecuador where the Moche people were, who are the predecessors to the Inca. And you're talking about my necklace that has theobromine. This is actually how they find chocolate in remains, because it's such a unique compound.
So they're looking for the chemical signature.
Yeah, so they find some brown stuff in the side of a vessel. They're like, if they want to know if it's chocolate or something else, they test for theobromine. That's a pretty easy compound to look for.
And it's stable enough through time.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, it doesn't get broken down a whole lot with heat or anything like that. So
pottery, ceramics, they're going to find it in there, yeah.
And it's actually chocolate is responsible for deciphering the Mayan language. So our logo here too is a modification of the glyph for cacao.
Oh, cool.
So as originally this cacao pod shape was like a comb, and Mayan is actually phonetic. So it was ka, wa. So you put it together and it's cacao. You drop the last vowel. And they kept seeing this symbol.
Oh, you're not joking. Cacao was the key that cracked the cipher of the Mayan language?
Yeah, because they kept seeing this glyph on all those vessels, the Mayan vessels that had cacao in them, along with some other things, with some other symbols. Some of them were changing. So this became known as the standard sequence. And so they finally put it together with talking to some modern Mayan language speakers that this kind of, some people call it a monkey head, but it's actually a fish. So I forget what the Mayan word for fish is, but it starts with a K. So this represents the K sound, as well as that comb shape. So they eventually said, these vessels all say this is a container for cacao for king or queen so-and-so. So it was buried with aristocracy and rulers and royalty, and that vessel always said, this belongs to this dude or dudette, and we're sending them into the afterlife with a nice vessel of chocolate.
Wow.
Along with that, the Rosita de Cacao that I let you smell, the gold dress of spices. So that in English it's called the funeral flower. I don't like to use that name.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't sound very edible or appetizing.
Nope.
That's the one where everybody smells something different.
Yeah. What did you pick up? Like citrus and.
The first it was like maple, and
Right.
then I closed it, shook it up, opened it again. I was like, oh, now it's citrusy.
Right. And was it cinnamon toast crunch or something?
Yeah, something. One of those cereals.
I got some of that.
Whereas some people get fenugreek or.
Fenugreek is kind of like mapley a little bit.
Yep, totally. So they actually buried that along with a lot of these with these Mayan mummies, and even when they opened up the tombs hundreds of years later, they could still smell that Rosita de Cacao.
Wow.
and it's
why is it called Rosita de Cacao?
Yeah, that's a good question. It is distant, really related to cacao, but I don't know if the Mayans picked up on that because it doesn't really look all that much.
Rosita means what?
Rose. But even that's, the Spanish name, the Aztec or Nahuatl name is Cacahuaxoxitl. I can't tell you how many hours it took me to practice that, so I could get it all out one.
You have to say it at a certain speed because it's like that's how it's programmed
muscle
in your mind.
memory. Yeah. So that also means xochitl is Nahuatl for flower, so it also means flower of the cacao. But I think it's more because they were using it in conjunction with cacao and chocolate, so they put it in their chocolate drinks. Along with jaguar cacao, which we talked about, and the mami sapote seed for that bitter almond taste. So I think it's from using it with cacao, not because they necessarily thought it was related to cacao. But
do you ever mess around with using them together?
I have made. We do make a Rosita de Cacao bar. I have tried to decyanide the mame seed enough to make it into a commercial chocolate bar, but I can never get just on that border of it still has some of that almondy aroma to it, but it doesn't burn your throat from the cyanide. So I don't really want to release something like that.
For the listener, we gotta unpack that a little bit. Sorry, but the mami sapote that you shared with us today was the best one I'd ever had, and I've been I don't want to say I'm a connoisseur of them because I live in the Northeast, but anytime I'm traveling and I see them, it's like something I'm eating. Mm-hmm. And I've always thought of it as being like the filling to a pumpkin pie.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
But this one that you had today was a different color inside than I'd ever had and a much better flavor. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's saying something because they're a good tasting fruit. But the seed, and that big, beautiful, shiny, almost like gloss, it looks like it's been lacquered, right?
Yep.
That seed inside has that smell that folks who aren't familiar with it will probably be familiar with amaretto, bitter almond. If you've ever cracked open an apricot kernel, a peach kernel, chewed into the kernel of a cherry.
Marzipan.
Yeah. Which is made with
almond extract.
extract. So all those flavors are coming from that cyanide compound that's in there. So it's this like double-edged sword because it's so delicious, but it's also pretty toxic.
Right.
And like I was telling you before, I don't know what the threshold dose is. I've messed around a lot with it, and I found it to be a lot safer than people think, but at least in my own body. But that said, we broke open that seed today and started scratching and sniffing it, and oh man, it's rich in there, huh?
Yeah.
And that's that big fat kernel too. So you're like, oh man, how do I render this into food?
There's actually a mole made mostly out of that mame seed.
Really?
Yeah, they call it sapayul in Mayan, and in a second the Aztec name for it will come to me.
So it's mole, so it's cacao.
No, not all moles have cacao.
We'll get back to the show in a moment, but first, head over to wild-fed.com to check out our WildFed hoodies. We really took our time choosing these hoodie blanks before we had them printed. They're done in a raglan style with a charcoal body and an olive green hood and sleeves. They've got our Food is All Around You logo on the front and our foraging basket, fishing rod, and hunting rifle on the back with the text Hunt, Forage, Fish. These are super soft and comfortable, look great, and work well in the field or in town. In fact, I keep having people tell me how much they like the quality of the hoodie itself. It's soft, lightweight, and extremely comfortable. Perfect for summer nights and those cool autumn days ahead. And they're on sale right now. Get 10% off with the coupon code HFF10 at wild-fed.com. Show your love for WildFed and the wild food lifestyle. Head over to wild-fed.com and use the coupon code HFF10. That's shorthand for Hunt, Forage, Fish 10 for 10% off your new favorite hoodie. Now, back to the show.
There's green moles, there's red moles. There's a really fun one called mancha mantelas, which means like tablecloth stainer. That has a lot of the achiote or annatto seed in it to make it deep red and giving it its staining quality. But yeah, the most popular and kind of the most fun ones are the ones with cacao in them because it gives you an excuse to have chocolate with your savory part of your
chocolate.
meal.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's exciting. How did you get interested in ethnobotany? You said you were in Silicon Valley before.
Yeah, it is kind of a strange story how I made that transition. So, I was working in Silicon Valley, and my girlfriend at the time, she was from Taiwan, so she knew a lot of the sort of more obscure, or, for a kid who grew up in Manhattan, there were kind of obscure fruits like loquats and kumquats that are kind of growing all around Silicon Valley, and she taught me about them, and I went with her to Taiwan, and I had all these amazing tropical fruits like mangosteen and rambutan and lychee that I'd never seen before.
That are delicious, too.
Right.
And they're like processed foods. I like, it's a process to open each one
I
and
see what
eat
you
it,
mean.
right? So you
Yeah.
like crack that shell, then you eat that fruit, then you spit out that seed, and it's like, I want another one. And I like, it slows you down a little bit, like eating, peanuts in the shell or something.
Right.
They're fun to eat.
You can enjoy it more because it limits the speed with it. It's not fast food at all. You're right. And then I was, kind of bored on my lunch hours a lot, and she got me my first foraging book ever from wild man Steve Brill up in New York.
Right. Who's sort of known for foraging Central Park.
Yep,
Right?
exactly. So I learned a lot from him. And then I started going around slowly in Silicon Valley. I was like, oh, this is mulberry. This is in the book, and it's delicious. And I used to, after eating a bunch of it and smearing it all over my arms and face, I'd lie on the side of the road with my bike and seeing if anyone stopped and thought I was an accident victim, tried to rescue me. And I don't know if you've heard, but Silicon Valley used to be like all cherry and apricot and peach orchards.
Oh, okay.
And there's some remnants of that in people's backyards. And a lot of times they don't even know that they have this amazing, delicious fruit if it's a little bit more obscure. Like pineapple guava or feijoa. Have you had that ever?
I have, yeah.
Or that's planted as an ornamental hedge everywhere in Silicon Valley, and people have no idea how amazingly delicious the flowers are. Have you had the flowers?
No.
They taste like they're candied straight off the tree.
Wow.
It's incredibly sweet. It's like the nectar is like impregnated in the succulent petals somehow, and the fruit are also incredible. So I used to crawl under people's hedges in their front yard and pick up all the fruit, because you only want to harvest the fallen ones. That's when they're perfectly ripe. Or people had like incredible mission fig trees just dripping with figs, and I'd go up to them. I'm like, "Hey, do you mind if I pick up some of these figs?" They're like, "I don't know what the hell that fruit is. It's like ruining my car's finish. You can take as much as you want." I'm like, "Okay, I only charge $5 a pound to haul it away for you, so it doesn't mess up." And so I started finding like all this fruit around Silicon Valley: persimmons, amazing apricots, peaches, plums. And so I started sort of trying to incorporate my tech background. I was working on like the sort of precursors to Google Earth and like geographic visualization.
No way, really?
So I started to make like maps.
How old were you at the time?
In my 20s.
Wow.
And so I had so much more fun going around what I call Shallow Alto and Menlo Park and Redwood City, and sort of foraging all the plants there, and instead of sitting in my hermetically sealed air-conditioned office. So I was like, I should do this full time, and I love traveling. And so I went on a sabbatical to Southeast Asia and South Asia for about 6 months, and there I got even deeper into it, more into like indigenous medicine, and I had so much fun not going to the regular tourist attractions, but just going around markets and talking to people like, oh, what's this fruit? How do you use it? What's it called in Balinese or in Thai or in Hindi? Or what's this plant? How do you use this medicinally? And I just got super deep into it. So like, I have so much fun talking to people about plants and their food. It's such a great way to connect to people from any culture. You just, sitting next to someone on the airplane and they seem really grumpy at first. And you say, oh, where are you from? Jamaica. I'm like, oh, saltfish and ackee. It's so amazing. Like, instantly light up.
Yeah, right.
And they want to tell you all about their food and their culture. So I feel like it's such a great way to connect, knowing these plants that come from everywhere. And my girlfriend at the time got really sick with Giardia. We didn't know it, but we went to the Dalai Lama's doctor in Dharamsala in northern India. And he like just checked a couple of her pulse points and looked at her tongue and her urine. And he's like, oh, you got Giardia 7 years ago. And he didn't know, but she had been in India 7 years earlier and had a really bad infection.
Oh my goodness.
And
How
he's
does
like,
that work?
take these, these pills that are a compound of these like 10 different plants. And I was like, well, how the hell did he know that? And I was pretty skeptical. I came from a very, science evidence-based background. But after like a week or two of being on these pills, she felt a whole lot better. And I was like, oh, I should. I had some like chronic eczema, and I had been trying to have Western doctors treat that.
Which they don't know how to do.
Yeah, exactly. They're really bad at chronic diseases. And then I went to a Chinese herbalist and acupuncturist, and they're like, oh yeah, forget all that steroid cream, that'll make it a lot worse. And they just gave me one simple ointment, did a few acupuncture treatments on it, and it was so much better. So I was kind of amazed, like, I should study this stuff. Like, I'm making these computer programs that like might be used by like 5 people, but it'll probably make their lives a hell of a lot harder and more pain in the butt. Looking at you guys trying to work out all your technical details with the recording equipment is like, I don't want to be back in that world.
Yeah, right.
I really love working with the plants. So like I could probably help improve people's lives if I studied, traditional medicine and tried to connect it with kind of a scientific background. And I really wanted to spend as much of my PhD time in the field and not in the lab. So I tried to design my research to sort of minimize that lab time. So what I did is kind of synthesized plants from different cultures.
But I mean, at some point you were like, I'm going back to school.
Yes.
Which is a pretty big deal. Like when you already have a career and you'd already graduated you had a bachelor's or?
Yep. And I was about
in computer science or something, or?
It was a self-design engineering major in virtual reality.
Wow, interesting. Okay.
So it can kind of combine mostly computer graphics, all different parts of engineering and perceptual psychology. But yeah, I had much more fun with the plants and traveling.
Like I'm going back to school to study plants. And where'd you go?
Well, I hadn't had a biology class since like 9th grade. So
right. You were starting from scratch.
Yes. Yeah, I totally had to start from scratch. So I went to first a bunch of community colleges in the Bay Area to sort of get up to speed. And then
And how old were you at that point?
29 when I finally went back to grad school.
That's such a cool story. Wow.
And I looked for a program in California. You'd think California would have an amazing ethnobotany program, and they do now at like Berkeley and a little bit at UC Davis, although UC Davis is more ag than ethnobotany. And a lot of the universities that formerly had kind of more traditional botany programs had kind of dismantled them or converted them all to genetic and taxonomy and systematics, which I wasn't interested in. So I had to go back home to New York, to City University of New York and the New York Botanical Garden, who had one of the, at the time, only existing programs in ethnobotany for a PhD anyway. I tried to come out to Hawaii at that time, but I knew nothing about like applying to grad school, so I didn't talk to the professors beforehand. So they just got this random like application from some dude in Silicon Valley. Like, what the hell is he gonna know about plants? So
right.
It wasn't until I was at a conference here, and one of the main professors here, Will McClatchy, he got stuck in my lecture because of other technical difficulties like projectors and stuff, but he really liked my talk. He was like, oh, you should come out here for a postdoc. I'm like, well, why didn't you accept me for a doctorate?
I already applied.
I'm going to make you stick to that, so I'm going to put you on my committee so you can't back out of it. So I roped him into that, and then 9 years later, when I finished my PhD, finally, I was able to get some NSF funding.
So you were like 38 when you finished your PhD?
Yep.
Wow, so it's like you had a whole nother life.
Yep.
That's amazing.
I'm on this is about my 4th career now.
Yeah? Wow.
So there's been virtual reality, ethnobotany, chocolate making, and now edible landscaping and grafting.
Yeah.
Cool. That's awesome.
Wow. And today was amazing, man. Like going out into the field with you. When we were walking around your garden, it was like there was many plants I recognized, and then when we went out into the field today, it was like I have no idea what I'm seeing. So it's like
totally new stuff for you.
Yeah, like a lot of what you're growing here are standout plants from different places. So they're things I've come across. But today, and the other thing that was interesting to me is you were like, we're only going to harvest, non-native plants.
Mm-hmm.
Many of the plants that we consider native plants are not native plants here.
No, right.
They are brought here by Polynesians who settled this place.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something like 800 years ago? Is that
that's
right?
the current thought.
Okay, so it's interesting that we'll call plants that were introduced 800 years ago here the native plants. But if they came here like 400 years ago, or when would Cook here? 300 years ago?
Yeah, about.
Okay, so 300 years ago, they're invasive, introduced, non-native, and even deleterious plants. But if they came over 800 years ago, they're considered native. But really, there's like 3 suites of plants.
Yeah.
There's the truly endemic plants here.
Right.
Then there's the original introduction.
The canoe plants.
The canoe plants.
Yeah.
And then there's the plants that have been brought over here since contact.
Yeah, post-contact.
With folks who weren't that first wave of settlers here.
Right.
You know what I mean? So there's this like interesting, I don't know how to, it's just something strange about that to me,
Yeah, and a lot of people, as you say, do lump the canoe plants into
as native plants.
Yeah, but they are a totally separate category. And
it seems like this would have been a very difficult place to live without that suite of plants that were brought here.
Completely, yeah, because there's very few large or significant edible plants that are native here. As I was saying when we were filming, like the largest edible fruit is called the llama. That's native here. It's a kind of grape-sized persimmon relative. So you've probably had the native like Virginia or American persimmon, and that's already a lot smaller than the Japanese varieties. This is even tinier.
Even tinier, yeah.
So it's a good thing that they brought all this stuff. But I don't know if those canoe plants were actually invasive here, because we don't really have much idea of what this landscape looked like before that.
Yeah. Some of them surely would have been, and some of them probably weren't, right?
Yeah.
As far as you mean invasive, in the sense that they take territory sort of aggressively.
Yeah, the only one I could really think of that's here now is like the kukui nut. It's delicious. It's both light and food and ornamentation and cosmetics, but you do see it growing kind of randomly everywhere in the hillsides, usually associated with like settlements and heiaus and traditional Hawaiian villages. But of any of the canoe plants, that's the one I think that could possibly have been invasive early on.
You mentioned that perhaps coconut was brought here.
Yeah.
I would have assumed that it showed up on the coastline, but
yeah, that's one that's really hard to trace because it disperses itself at sea, so it could easily beat the Polynesian Voyagers here.
How did they get here? How? It's just, it staggers the imagination to picture people arriving here by canoe.
Right. Not knowing.
I can't take it.
My advisor that I mentioned earlier, McClatchy, was working in Ponape, and he said it was pretty amazing. Their navigational skills were like better than GPS. So he went out with a canoe paddler out into these kind of uncharted or uninhabited islands. And at first they were using a GPS because the guy wanted to get acquainted with modern technology, and they got completely lost. And he was like, screw this GPS. There's a storm coming. He lay down in the bottom of the canoe for like 5 or 10 minutes and felt the directions of the different waves. And then he stood up and he was like, okay, we have to go that way.
Come on, really?
They paddled that way for
Amazing.
like an hour, and they hit the exact land that they were looking for.
Because I've heard things like that just subtle variations in wave pattern could indicate to somebody that there was a landmass.
Yep.
I remember one time sitting by a lake, and there was a road there, and as cars were going by, I was watching the vibration ripple through the water, and I thought, man, if you had the technology to read the water, you could assemble probably a really realistic 3D rendering of everything that was going around that was causing vibration in the water. We just don't have that technology.
It's like very slow sonar, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So it makes
Slonar.
sense.
Slonar.
Slonar.
I like that.
Yeah, that's what you're feeling right now from the kava. But it makes sense that somebody could do that.
Right.
But it's hard for us to imagine with our incredibly short attention spans and ability to really hang on to details today. But
Have you heard about the weird case of the sweet potato?
no,
Do you know where sweet potato is native to?
no.
It's actually Peru
really?
and South America, but that is sometimes called one of the canoe plants. So that's like one of the few pieces of evidence that there was pre-Western contact between Polynesians and Peruvians.
Yeah.
And there's the whole Thor Heyerdahl, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, hypothesis of Kontiki, that the Peruvians built like reed boats and sailed to Polynesia. But I would think it's a little more likely that the Polynesians were already amazing.
Seafarers.
Yeah, exactly. And they continued on past Hawaii, like, oh, we got here. This is pretty cool. Let's see what else is even further east from here. And so they made it down to Rapa Nui, Easter Island, and so it's just a little bit further to go to Peru. And so they brought the sweet potato back from there. And there's a list of a few other plants that are native to South America and were probably here before Cook came here even. That shows that they were traveling even all the way across the Pacific, not just stopping midway. And so there's kind of this ranking of starches here. So taro, or kalo as it's called here, is the top dog.
They call it kalo?
Kalo is the Hawaiian name for taro, yeah.
Of which there are many, many varieties.
Oh yeah, I don't even know a drop in them. I'm growing like 3 or 4, but there's probably hundreds, if not thousands. So that's the main one here because it's kind of an all-year crop, and you can preserve it as fermented sour poi. That's the like ground. It's kind of like the mashed potatoes of taro. Did you guys have that yet?
No. That's
That's another thing I forgot to mention. We're talking about Hawaiian food. That's probably the most important staple one. And it's a lacto ferment. So sometimes we throw some sour poi in our cacao fermentation to get it started.
Neat.
Okay. So that's the top. Then breadfruit, which is called ulu here, is like the second tier one. Still pretty revered, but since it's a fruit, it's only around in a certain season, like late summer, fall, and it's a little harder to preserve.
That's again a canoe plant.
Yep, that's from probably native to Asia or like Papua New Guinea or something like that. In Samoa, they've learned how to ferment that in underground pits, so they kind of treat it like the fermented poi here. But in Hawaii, for some reason, they haven't carried over that tradition. And then sweet potato, because it's probably a later arrival, because they had to go all the way to Peru to get it and bring it back. So that's kind of like the low class starch. But that is one of my favorites. That's incredibly easy to grow.
Yeah.
And you can eat the greens of it too. I guess you can eat taro greens as well. But they do require a little
that
more
big broad leaf. It can be eaten.
Yeah.
Really?
It has the enzymes in it that try to digest your tongue as you're trying to digest it, just like the root, unless you cook it. Yeah. So I've had a lot of people say, "Oh, it's making lau, which is pork or taro root wrapped in the taro leaf." And they just didn't cook it quite long enough, and it said, "Oh, it really like tingled my mouth and
interesting.
Felt like glass shards or something like that."
Not a good thing.
Nope.
So it's like the Hawaiian Islands were just these super fertile pieces of land that were waiting for people to come and plant stuff there.
Right. Yeah, probably
all this volcanic soil.
Yeah. They had no there was no pests for a lot of these plants, so they grew really easily here. Because the pests that probably came much later hadn't had time to catch up with them. But that's kind of interesting point about it being really fertile here. A lot of people, especially when they're moving here from the mainland, they're like, "Oh, I can just dump a bunch of seeds in the ground and it'll all grow and it'll be amazing." And that is true at the start, and stuff does. I had only gardened in California and on my lanai in Manhattan, prior to here. So I was like, oh, this is so easy to grow stuff. And then 6 months later, I was really disappointed when everything got attacked by pests and died. So it is a very, you have to sort of forget everything you know about growing stuff from the mainland and reset here, because people look at how much biota there is, how much living matter they can see, and they're like, oh, the soil must be so fertile. But actually in tropical soils, there's only about 3 feet of living matter, whereas in temperate soils where you guys are, there's about 30 feet of living matter in the soils. Wow. It's much more the balance of the living matter is in the soils in temperate areas, whereas here in the rainforest, it's all in the living material above ground. And so it's just with all the constant rains, any nutrition in the soil is getting washed out. So you have to feed your plants much more frequently. So with my gardening business, Natty by Nature, I have to always teach people about. I'm glad you're old enough to get that reference.
I love everything about it.
The people like, oh, why do I have to feed my tree? And they're like, well, when was the last time your mango fruited? Oh, about like 5 years ago. When's the last time you fed your mango? About 5 years ago. I'm like, do you see a connection between those two things?
Correlation does not equal causation.
Do you expect your kid to grow up, well-adjusted and well-fed if you're not giving them any food at all? The same is true of the plants.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, you brought up the pests. Like, we have the incredible clean slate every spring from having had a winter. And
right.
When I was on Maui, when I was in my 20s, one of the things I remember was that the mosquitoes were a lot faster than the mosquitoes back home. Because our mosquitoes are born, they're out for a few months, they're slow and easy to kill, and then they're killed off. But here, where I imagine they can just breed all year, and so they're it's like there's not any break in the continuity of generations, and so it's like they've adapted and they've evolved to be faster,
much higher evolutionary
I remember
pressure.
that. I was like, man, they're like houseflies. Like, I couldn't catch some of them, whereas at home it's very easy to just snag a mosquito out of the air, And so anyway, I've noticed that about them here, and just wondered, when you don't have that big die off every year, that's got to have you've just got to have a lot of pests that can really get at your plants. Yeah.
And that started to wipe out a lot of the Kona coffee we were talking about in the backyard. Unfortunately, we got the coffee berry borer. We've gotten coffee rust here more recently. So a lot of the coffee farms are kind of going downhill in terms of production. It's pretty sad driving around Kona these days and seeing the decimated coffee orchards. But
being an island or a chain of islands, there's a little bit more of consider Florida, for instance, which is, man, I feel for the folks of that state, because it's very easy to bring things there, and almost everything from anywhere in the world can set up shop there pretty easy, right? So you've got this situation like more non-native reptiles than native reptiles there, for instance. But here, because when we flew in, we had to fill out those ag reports, and almost like you were traveling to a foreign country.
Right.
And so you can control a little bit more. There's no snakes here.
A little bit. It's not as hard to bring things here as it should be.
But there's no snakes here.
True.
Which means people have not been able to bring snakes here. That's incredible to me.
We get one scare a year or so when someone finds someone escape, and all of the Department of Ag will descend on this one snake to get rid of it.
I thought for sure I saw a snake today when there was a petiole from a big
palm or something.
Yeah, fallen out of a tree, and I just thought, because whenever I'm in the tropics, I'm paying a lot of attention to the ground, and I'm used to snakes and other stinging and biting creatures, and I jumped Grant, you were filming, and I saw that you saw me reacting to something out of the corner of my eye, and then I just reminded myself, man, there's no snakes here. I don't know how that's possible, because you go down to the Amazon and it's terrifying.
Yep.
It's scary. They're like, oh yeah, by the way, there's a anaconda in that pond. You're like, oh my god.
I've heard multiple people say if the supply chain broke down, there's 2 or 3 days worth of food on the islands.
Absolutely.
Do you think that the islands grow all its own food and support all the people that are on it?
I've had a friend who's a geographer who actually mapped that out and studied that, and he said, yes, it could if we knocked down a few of those high rises in Waikiki and converted them back to taro lo'i, which is like the flooded taro growing patches that were traditional here, or converted more of the areas to fish ponds where you're sort of actively growing fish in like a aquaculture system.
Which is a traditional thing that the Hawaiians were doing pre-contact.
Yeah, and they are starting to bring some of them back, like in Heia on the windward side of Oahu. They're reestablishing and remaking a traditional fish pond area there. So if we convert it, it's not a lot, but if we just converted some of the land that's now in development into actual ag, we'd be a lot better at
What about though too?
people.
Like there's ranching, and then there's also, I would imagine most of the arable land is in pineapple and sugar cane, and then
Not much sugarcane here anymore.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the last big sugarcane farm was shut down like 5 or 10 years ago on Maui.
And then I hear that a lot of the genetically modified crops are tested out here as well. So arable land is being used for cash crops and test bed for companies,
But not necessarily staple crops. So yeah.
right? So if that could be right, if all that pineapple land could be converted over to growing food,
Totally.
I would imagine that is another solution.
That would feed
to
a lot
this.
more people, for sure.
But it seems to me too, to Grant's point, one of the ways it could be done is folks doing exactly what you're doing, because every one of these houses could have a food forest.
When I see what you're doing here, it's like no one has an excuse, you know?
Right.
It's like when it's like, oh, I don't have enough land to really have a garden. I don't, you know?
Yeah, I do squeeze them in pretty tight. One of my friends calls me the square foot pusher.
You're a lot of different pushers.
A lot of nicknames.
So he's like, usually it's recommended you have your trees like 8 or even 10 feet apart, and I've compressed them to like 4 or 6 feet apart. I do have to like do a lot of fertilizing. I bring in a lot of Zudu, which is like herbivore manure from the Honolulu Zoo.
So you get inputs from the Honolulu Zoo.
That's cool.
Yeah. I don't know if that's a universal thing. It should be everywhere because, like, it's a great resource.
You paying for it, or
No, they give it out for free.
You're like, how much will you pay me to haul this away from you?
Yeah, exactly. You probably could in some places. Like I was charging people to take their figs away.
multiple people are doing that?
Just the Honolulu Zoo. I don't know if it happens on other
But
islands.
multiple people on the island are taking compost?
Oh, yeah. It's super popular, especially during the
Cool.
pandemic. They had to develop a waiting list because so many people were getting into gardening and looking for local inputs.
From what
of
species?
fertilizer. All the
From ruminants?
herbivores. Yeah,
Zebra.
ruminants.
Yeah, the zebras.
Yeah, zebras, elephants.
Just
I
fertilizing my garden with elephant.
Just
Yeah.
like to spread some elephant manure around. Element manure around?
The
That's
only drawback is it has some of the antibiotics that they might be giving the animals, but it's probably a lot better than any of the petrochemical fertilizers. that
Sometimes
you
I'm
have.
just like, yeah, welcome to Earth. Everything's fucked.
Right.
Like just do what you can do.
Yeah, it's one concession we have to make. So yeah, I definitely have to do a lot of input. So I do hugelculture, I do sheet mulching. You probably saw the cardboard boxes all around. I'm like, Amazon is sending me free mulch.
I was gonna say
every
one of the
week.
hugelculture spots had a smile on it. That was the Amazon smile.
They're sending me free mulch. I'm gonna use it. It's dead plant material. It works.
I just want to touch on the traditional aquaculture that we were mentioning before, because you have a pretty traditional setup here.
I don't know if I call it traditional. Even for me, it's only a year old, so not much of a tradition yet.
Tell us a little bit about what Betty? Bertha.
Is the giant tilapia in there, and she's probably the biggest tilapia I've ever seen, about like a 1.5 foot long. So I inherited her from my friend Matt, who was moving to Japan and couldn't really fit Bertha on his carry-on luggage. So he's like, I know you'll take.
You're only allowed to have 3 ounces of liquid, so it's kind of hard to bring a tilapia.
That is the friendliest fish I've ever seen.
I think that you guys just had a special touch with her. I've never seen anyone.
She came right up and ate out of my hand.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I was like dropping the pellets into her mouth.
Yeah.
It was amazing. But she was in like a 55-gallon drum or something, right?
Yeah, a 55-gallon drum, and then
that water recirculates.
There's a 50-gallon tank that flows into, and then it goes up into 3 half 50-gallon drums, I guess 25-gallon drums that have all the plants in them. So basically, it's this almost entirely closed ecosystem. So Biosphere 3, we could call it maybe. And so the fish poop basically feeds the plants. It's their fertilizer. So I was talking all about that, Zoodoo that I have to put everywhere else. In the aquaponics, I don't have to use any of that because Bertha's poop just feeds those.
It's a completely closed system.
And then the plants clean the water?
Yeah, so they take out all the ammonia and toxin. They're using that for food.
So you don't need any kind of filtration.
I have not done anything to the water except for refilling it.
And it was pretty clean water.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you see yourself expanding that operation?
I'd have to take out a few of my fruit trees to do that,
no.
And I don't know if I could handle that.
How many fish do you think that garden could handle?
I used to have a bunch of catfish fingerlings in the side tank, not with Bertha because she ate all her tank mates before I even got the system. I think that's one of the reasons she's so big. And they, all but one of them got eaten. There was one remaining in there, Bertha 2, let's call her. And then something happened with my power and the pumps got shut off and she kicked the bucket. So
What do they get eaten by?
Each other. Unless I don't think my cat Paquita here is much of a fisher woman, so I don't think she was picking them out of the aquaponics tank. There may be some neighbor cats that could have been plucking them, but I think it was more likely it's just not large enough for that many fish. So if I wanted more fish in there to be able to harvest, make a catfish po' boy every few months from there, I'd probably have to expand the tanks.
Then how are you saying you could make that a completely closed loop system without feeding them?
Oh yeah, so the only input I have now from outside is I have to buy fish food for Bertha, but you can make that from your compost by growing black soldier fly larvae.
Oh yeah.
Those giant black flies. I don't know if you have them in Maine too. Maybe just tropical, but they have pretty large larvae.
I've thought about doing that with chickens. You just drill a hole in the bottom of a bucket and they kind of fall out.
Yeah, that's what
the larvae fall out?
Yeah.
And then the chickens just peck them up?
Right.
Yeah, there's a whole system for it's called a black soldier fly factory. And they have this little ramp that they go up and then they fall into a receptacle.
Yeah.
I don't know why I have the urge to go up when they're mature, and then you just pull off that cup and feed that, or you could just have it right above the fish tank, and so it'd be a slow drip of food for Bertha. But I haven't gone that extra step yet.
How many plants do you have growing up there?
In the aquaponics?
Yeah.
Let's see. I have them packed even tighter than the rest of my garden. I have blueberry, shiso, a bunch of chilies, daikon, nasturtium, mint, culantro, which is a more tropical relative of cilantro, basil, cholesterol plant, and Brazilian spinach, and a couple beans. So what's that, 11 or so plants in those?
That's so cool.
55-gallon drums. Yeah, it's been pretty fun. I like the sound of the water running in the background.
Yeah.
Not all my neighbors enjoy it all the
Really?
time. Yeah.
So subtle though.
Yeah. When it's working well, but sometimes when it runs out of water, it starts making weird wheezing noises in the background. So, do we need to give you guys some chocolate to wake you back up from the kava?
I've a very small amount.
Okay, so you can still
I have
sleep
eaten
tonight.
more chocolate today than.
Well, this is the subtle and probably low alkaloid one, the Criollo, the gateway chocolate one that we call it. And this was one of the first Hawaiian grown chocolates to ever win an international award.
Yeah, you were talking about some of the awards. I didn't even know really there was chocolate awards, to be honest, but it makes sense, obviously, when you think about it. This is 70%, huh?
Mm-hmm.
Because you could almost convince me this was a milk chocolate.
Right?
Yeah.
Totally. It even looks kind of milk chocolate because of those lighter beans I was showing you earlier. They don't have that deep purple or brown color, even when you ferment them. So they have a much lighter color. Oh, and the other turning a bug into a feature I forgot to mention about chocolate in Hawaii, since we're so far from the equator, the cacao beans have a naturally higher cocoa butter content to them.
Really?
So normally you can think of that cocoa bean as about half cocoa powder and half cocoa butter, so about half fat. But that actually ranges from about 45% when you're right around the equator to 60% when you're far from the equator. And I like to think of it as the cacao beans are putting on extra blubber to stay warm through the cold Hawaiian
that's cool.
winter. So the further you get from the equator, higher the cocoa butter content. So it gets sweeter, not because there's more sugar in there, but because there's less bitter cocoa powder side of things. And they have a nicer, creamier mouthfeel because it's more fat naturally.
Because part of the art of making chocolate bars is separating the solids from the oils and then recombining them, right?
No, I mean, good bean to bar is not done that way. We do have to add a little bit of extra cocoa butter that's extracted from another batch of cacao from usually Dominican Republic or Peru. But that's just to help with the tempering process to make it shiny because it's so humid in Hawaii. If we didn't add the extra cocoa butter,
Like a matte finish to it?
it would be really sludgy and almost impossible to stir and temper.
Oh, okay.
As you guys saw in the chocolate factory today, that process of it, stirring it. And we also left out all the emulsifiers that you might see in like a big name brand chocolate bar. So they'll have either soy lecithin, or more recently they've moved to a chemical compound so long that I can't even remember, even though I've studied biochemistry. Yeah, so it's just, it probably won't even fit on the label anymore. So it's just an acronym of PGPR now you might see on a Hershey's or Mars bar. And so they add that emulsifier mostly to help with the grinding and using a little bit less energy, but also the combining of the fat and the water-soluble parts of chocolate. So to take that out, we had to add a little extra cocoa butter. But some craft chocolate makers on the mainland, they have the luxury of just making what's called 2-ingredient chocolate, so just cacao and sugar, and that's it. So in
other words, that bean or nib is just ground down.
Yeah, directly, and you don't have to separate them.
But like a Hershey's bar, they are separating it, right? So it's cacao powder being mixed back with cacao butter.
No, the only people...
I guess I just don't know.
There are probably from the world you came from. You're thinking of that because in raw chocolate, it's often made for some reason from separated raw cacao and raw cocoa butter.
Is that because they're not real chocolatiers?
Well,
I'll say it. You don't have to say
First of all, I am not a chocolatier. It sounds sexier, but chocolatiers are the people who melt down other people's chocolate and make them into confections and barks and such. So I'm a chocolate maker. Doesn't sound quite as sexy, so I'm trying to bring sexy back to that term. And
Chocolate maker.
Chocolatero. I like to use the Spanish term. And if I could figure out the Aztec term for chocolate maker, I would use that.
Yes.
It's probably like chocowashoshutel or something like that.
It's got a lot of X's in it.
Right.
I love the design on the chocolate bar too.
Oh, thanks. That kind of prism mold.
Yeah.
They've started making holograms on
I was gonna say it's almost holographic.
Yeah, they actually the cocoa butter can pick up such fine microscopic imprints if your mold is fine enough to have like diffraction grading level, like wavelength scale, you can actually get a hologram to transfer to the surface of your chocolate bar. I haven't gotten to the technology. I used to be really into holography in high school, so I should try to mix those two talents.
You got to bring back the holography, man.
Yeah, you miss it. So the raw chocolate makers, because they don't necessarily have those grinders, or it's hard to find something that's really called raw cacao, they will mix cocoa butter and cocoa powder to make sort of reconstitute a chocolate bar. But I like raw chocolate in many ways, but I feel like it's a misnomer because usually the raw food term is used for food that has not gone above 115 degrees when a lot of enzymes denature. But any well-fermented cacao should have gone up to at least 120 degrees in the fermentation. It's this really hot since it's a tropical ferment. And so most of the cacao they're using has gone up to that temperature. And so I feel like it should be called unroasted cacao, which they do skip. Right. And that leaves you a lot more antioxidants in there. So it is potentially better for you if you like the flavor of that. But I always say, like, you know, it's a matter of like having something with a shitload of antioxidants. Sorry, I just
it's completely okay here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it might have a shitload of antioxidants in it, but it's so bitter that you don't want to eat a lot of it. Where if something has slightly less antioxidants, but it's really delicious, you're going to eat like 10 times as many antioxidants
in the end, yeah.
So if you like raw or unroasted chocolate, you know, go for it. That's probably healthier for you, but not everyone likes that flavor. And you also have to do the roasting to have kind of like a kill step to get rid of the bacteria and foodborne pathogens in there. And to avoid that, they do the pressing of the cocoa butter in a 10,000 pound hydraulic press, and that kills the pathogens but still keeps it technically raw.
But do you get, like, it's like coffee, the roast brings out a lot of flavors.
Yes.
And that must be part of it as well, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, raw chocolate is a whole different world. I used to make some unroasted chocolate, and it was fairly popular, but we had to kind of have like one machine dedicated to just that. So it became a lot to do when it was just a small part of our sales. So,
what's your favorite chocolate bar that you make?
That's like asking someone their favorite child. I can't say
what
it
are
in
some
front of
what
them.
what are some of your most popular flavors?
Coconut ginger is super popular. That's kind of like a vegan milk chocolate with coconut milk in there instead. I tried every combination in the world with the coconut milk. I did like coconut lemongrass and coconut cardamom, and I had like, I think 12 different ingredients in there, and like every permutation and combination of them I tested it out on a bunch of friends, and the coconut ginger was the most popular. That's been one of our biggest sellers. Also the triple cacao that I mentioned earlier with the fruit and the nibs. That's won like 10 awards now. So when it's hard to make because those ingredients are pretty hard to get, especially the fruit. But when we can make a lot of it, that's super popular too. And then you guys had the Earl Grey tea bar.
That was so cool.
That's amazing.
That's my favorite morning bar to wake up with.
Oh, yeah.
I was really taken by that. You had the white chocolate with the coffee bean.
Oh, yeah, the cafe con leche.
Yeah, so it looked the color of dark chocolate, but that was all coffee bean giving it that color, right? That was really unique.
You said a whole bar has 7 shots in it of espresso?
At least, maybe 9.
Wow.
You know what I like too? The hibiscus one.
That's really good.
Yeah, that's part of the reason we're named Madre, because we try to do chocolate from the motherland in Central America. So it's kind of inspired by these Mesoamerican flavors like Jamaica and horchata.
Oh, yeah, there was
the horchata.
It was amazing.
So, yeah, what do you put in that one?
Horchata.
Yeah, just pour a drink of
right
horchata.
in there.
No, that came because I lived in the Bay Area. We had amazing taquerias and incredible Mexican food, and I got really hooked on that. Then I came here. There's a lot of Mexican restaurants, but they're not so great in my opinion. Yeah. And a lot of people ask us for white chocolate, and I'm like, I don't believe in white chocolate. It's not a real thing. I actually said that to the grandson of the guy who invented white chocolate.
Is white chocolate...
White chocolate's not chocolate, is it?
White chocolate sweetened cacao butter?
Yep, with milk.
Okay.
Oh,
yeah.
I didn't realize there was actually chocolate in white chocolate.
Well, there's
all
cocoa
the solids
butter.
are out. So
yeah.
all of the compounds that are sort of all the feel good parts are out of there.
Right, the healthy parts, the antioxidants. The cocoa butter does have some health benefits in terms of it being a good vegetable
but
fat.
no theobromine, obviously that's in the solids.
Yeah,
right?
probably almost none. So yeah, it's just cocoa butter, sugar, and milk powder, basically in white chocolate. So one of our staff suggested, well, you're getting all these crests. Why don't you make something fun and flavored to make white chocolate more interesting? And I was like, yeah, I really miss horchata, and I've been experimenting with coconut milk and the coconut ginger, so maybe I'll try a coconut milk horchata bar. And we had some, have you ever had genmai cha, the Japanese roasted rice tea?
No.
So we had some of that from some other project, and we had the roasted or like popped rice from that. So we threw that in for the rice element or horchata, some toasted almonds, cinnamon, vanilla, and everybody loved it. Even the people who are like, no, I only like dark chocolate. I refuse to try your horchata. I'm like, just have a little bit. I'm sure you like it. And they get converted. So that is the only white chocolate that I eat currently.
Yeah. And you ship your chocolate anywhere?
Oh yeah, all over the States, the mainland, to Europe, Australia, Japan. We just sent some to Saudi Arabia.
Really?
Yeah.
So if people listening want to buy it,
just go to madrechocolate.com and they can order it, and we ship out every Monday and Tuesday, so it doesn't melt in transit.
Oh, cool.
But nattybynature.net.
And that's your
edible landscape
business. Yeah. And then madrechocolate.com.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, man, I'm bringing some of these bars with us. We're headed to Molokai in the morning, and
awesome.
I've got a stack of those bars. I'm pretty excited about it.
I'm sure they'll love it.
I'm glad I didn't buy any chocolate while we were here, because we were in some shops, basically we found Waikiki to be like a giant mall.
Yes, absolutely.
And so we were like sort of walking through endless malls, and I did come across some chocolate, but I'm glad that I held out. So people find you at madrechocolate.com. They find you at nattybynature.net.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, cool. And then what about foraging stuff? Are you still doing that?
Yeah, totally. Especially during the pandemic. We've been doing a ton of, it's gotten even more popular. And so I do that every third Sunday of the month.
Oh, cool. So it's a regular thing.
Yeah, here on Oahu. And if people want to do a private one, I'm happy to arrange that wherever you want.
Yeah, because it seems to me if somebody's listening to this and they're like, well, I'm going to Hawaii on a trip, if they're listening to this show, they're into wild foods, and so it could be a really cool experience for people to come work with you. So
yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Please
come visit us in Hawaii. Have chocolate and amazing fruit and wild forage plants.
Yeah, we can vouch for it. Hey, man, this has been an awesome day, a long day. So thank you for...
my pleasure.
Yeah, you've been incredibly patient with all my questions today. And
hopefully we got you enough stimulants.
I'm very stimulated, but also very relaxed.
Good.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Dan.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on. Yeah. I hope to see you guys again very soon.
Thanks for listening to the WildFed podcast. Help us grow this show by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review. It ensures better rankings and more advertiser interest, which translates directly into better shows, more awesome guests, and a constant stream of fresh new content. Have a question you'd like answered on the show, or a hunting, fishing, or foraging trip you'd like to host us on? Email us at info@wild-fed.com. If you still haven't seen season 1 of the WildFed TV show, you can go to myoutdoortv.com, grab yourself a free trial subscription, and then check out all 10 episodes. Season 2 of WildFed premieres on Outdoor Channel in early 2022. And be sure to visit our website, wild-fed.com, to check out our store for WildFed hats, stickers, and more. WildFed. Food is all around you.